Hi, everybody. Just a little disclaimer before we start the podcast. This episode was recorded on Tuesday, January 9th in the morning, right before some of the events that took place in Ecuador, which I'm sure you've heard about. We did an emergency broadcast, which was released yesterday, Thursday. So we will link that in the description down below if you'd like to watch. Enjoy the podcast. Flash news. A couple of days ago, one of the leaders of a gang in Ecuador escaped a jail. He had been there since 2011. So he'd been there already 13 years, basically. Somehow escaped. There's an investigation going on. They're saying that maybe some of the prison guards were involved in helping him escape and whatnot. But that led to the president announcing a state of exception, estado de excepción, which basically there's a curfew now from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. The government is deploying police and military throughout the country to try to find him.
Carl, regardless of what you believe, I don't think it's a stretch to say in Ecuador, anywhere I've been in Ecuador, that more people believe in God and are willing to talk about it, to talk about God, whatever God they believe in, but they believe in God, than there is in the States. I mean, maybe here in Ecuador, where it is much more open to different viewpoints and different beliefs, and there are indigenous beliefs that aren't Christian that exist here that have been practiced for thousands of years.
I don't know if I've met an Ecuadorian atheist. You know, for many families it was an agrarian lifestyle for so many generations. Like, you're not gonna pick up from that and, go and become a doctor in Spain or something. So you have this culture where everyone's known each other forever, and those ties go back forever. And generally, what that has created here, and I do think this is causation and not correlation, but is a degree of humanity, of camaraderie, of caring about one another, of sort of just doing things in a way that makes sense. Mm-hmm.
Ecuadorian flash news. A couple of days ago, one of the leaders of a gang in Ecuador escaped a jail. He had been there since 2011. So he'd been there already 13 years, basically. Somehow escaped. There's an investigation going on. They're saying that maybe some of the prison guards were involved in helping him escape and whatnot. But that led to the president announcing a state of exception, estado de excepción, which basically there's a curfew now from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. The government is deploying police and military throughout the country to try to find him.
Carl, and what was did they talk about the reason why the 11 to 5 curfew? Is that, or what?
I don't know, but it just kind of makes sense, actually. Like late. I guess the criminals usually conduct their business through the night hours like that.
Oh, so that stifles from them conducting business potentially.
Yeah,
I see.
And like everyone's supposed to be in. Yeah, exactly. So if you have people out past that time, they're probably doing something illegal somewhat. So that would be the reason. And then there are people that work very early in the morning, so they'll have to 5 a.m. seems to kind of make sense. So there's that. So that's all of Ecuador, and they declared it for 60 days. Carnival's coming up in February, so I don't know how they're gonna hold that up.
No way.
During Carnival.
No.
Right.
There's parties in every downtown in most towns and cities. So we'll see what happens for that. I mean, it doesn't really affect us. Plus here, there's not gonna be anybody to enforce the curfew like in Vilcabamba, but it doesn't affect us from the standpoint that we're always pretty much home by 11 p.m. And in bed at 5 a.m. So anyways, there's that. And yeah, there was a few prison riots, as Jesse mentioned. Because of that, my understanding in Cuenca and in Riobamba and maybe some other prisons, the inmates kind of took over the prison, which they already basically run the prisons, the inmates. There's guards like on kind of the outskirts, but the inmates, they cook and clean and kind of do their own thing down below. But yeah, there were some riots. They got on the rooftops. I think there might have been some attempt to escape. Maybe some of them escaped. I believe in Riobamba, if I'm not mistaken, some of them might have actually escaped as well. And yeah, that's the state of exception, estado de excepción here in Ecuador. This is something the Ecuadorian government has done a few times with other instances. For example, during COVID, it was the estado de excepción. There was also a curfew and some, you had to wear masks in certain areas and whatnot. And then, over when there was some violence in Guayaquil, I believe there was just the state of Guayas was under the Estado de Excepción.
Esmeraldas had as well at
Esmeraldas
some
as
point.
well. Yeah, so
I
that
think
just
Manabi
happened.
may have gone into something as well at some point.
Yeah, so that just happened yesterday. That's basically the extent of what I know. of the
Right.
situation.
And that's, that kind of stuff, as it happens, it makes me value, choosing to live where we live, just because even when you see things like that or hear about things, it doesn't directly impact our life here, like our way of life, our lifestyle, our stress, really, because it's not, I don't know, maybe it's just because it's not enforced here, and it's similar in the States, like in cities when they have mandates and stuff like that, they're much more enforced and easily enforced, and as you get more rural, you have more lax, and you have, much, less enforcement of some of those types of regulations in a lot of those places. So it's similar in that way, where we're rural, we're in the mountains, so it's not, people don't look at things the same way here that they do in cities, and it's not enforced the same way. So that's like a hidden gem or value that I have for this area, that
Of course.
we don't have to deal with that the drama of some of this stuff because of where we live. So
No, and that's actually a really good point. Like, if you look up Ecuador news, you'll see a lot of things happening in Ecuador, but those things don't affect us here, barely, right? Like, we're really in a kind of a bubble here, in a very special place, and most rural small towns of Ecuador would also be the same.
Right.
It's just that they probably don't have the community and maybe the same weather that we have here. But if you go in most rural Ecuador, there's no crime, there's no theft, none of that stuff really affects people. But yeah, Ecuador in general, like, it's going through some hard times right now, on the coast and some of the major cities, and the gangs and cartels fighting and all that stuff. Like, that's happening. It's just that we don't really see or feel it here to any extent, really.
right, yeah, it'll be interesting to see, what happens with that. There's multiple cartels now, in South America, and let's be honest, it's not just South America. It's the U.S., it's Canada, it's Europe, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
The drugs aren't. The drug problem isn't a retail problem here in Ecuador. It's an export problem. It's not, Ecuadorians are just druggies. It's
Not at all.
It's not even common for most of these drugs they're being exported to Europe. They're being exported to U.S. and Canada. So that's where that's where the retail markets are.
Mostly Europe, because the U.S. we've moved on. We're now in the fentanyl.
Yeah, no kidding. That's wild.
So we're cooler now
Dude,
than
that's
cocaine.
wild.
So Europe now is.
So I may or may not know some friends back in the States that have used, cocaine in their lives, or still do, perhaps, and they don't now. Like, that's what got them to stop, is the fentanyl. Like,
really?
these
great.
guys are now not using some of these,
Because they're worried about
because the
it being
fentanyl is so
contaminated.
rampant. The fentanyl is so rampant that they're stopped. They're done.
Nice.
So it's interesting that that's actually stopped people that have habitually used a certain substance for many years, and now they're not, because they don't want to die, at least that way.
Because it's laced with fentanyl.
Right.
Could be.
It could be.
Yeah.
Right. So that's definitely interesting. But the point is that, like, the cartels, is just like I was talking to you, Carl, earlier, where I grew up in Chicago. There was, little drug dealers, and as they get bigger in certain communities, and then they go and they get bigger, and then they're the drug dealer for the city, and they've got these little guys running for them, and it doesn't matter. It's always like the war on drugs, and going to school, and it's always the DARE program and the war on drugs, and we're going to lock up that guy. It doesn't matter. It's just, you lock that guy up, and then it's the next guy up, and then unless the demand for the product ceases, it doesn't matter if you lock up the criminal. The next criminal steps up and takes over that territory and runs those drugs. And so and as long as the U.S. and some of the bigger powers are fostering or potentially even funding, like, it's not a conspiracy theory to say that the CIA funds drug runs. They've made movies about it. There's documentaries. There's people that have worked.
Congressional testimony.
There's congressional testimonies, right? So unless that stops, like, I don't know what the solution for the president of Ecuador in stopping that. Like, I don't know if the power is really his to make that happen in a way. Like there are things he can do to keep the crime or the ramifications of that trade geographically confined.
Right.
I think he can do that stuff. But to do a war on drugs and a war on cartels, man, I'm not sure how that solves the problem because it's not confined to Ecuador.
But how do you compare it to El Salvador, which they basically mano dura, they basically went and fought the war on crime, on drugs and cartels and whatnot, and arrested a bunch of people and killed people as well.
Right. No, that's right. That's the humanitarian side of what Bukele did that people don't agree with, because that's a slippery slope with like martial law and police state and doing that. It's a slippery slope. But the difference between, look where El Salvador is and look where Ecuador is. So you've got the largest producers of cocaine
Colombia,
in
Peru.
South and North that border us.
Yeah.
So we're in a different geographical position than El Salvador to how we can battle. So that obviously that has had great impact in El Salvador. Doing that in Ecuador, you can't use those same measures to get the same result in Ecuador, in my opinion, because of where we're located and where the drugs are produced. So
different problems too, right? I mean, I think El Salvador, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's where MS-13 originated. Is that correct? Or is that Honduras?
I don't recall actually.
Either El Salvador or Honduras. I think it was El Salvador, but yeah, I mean, I think El Salvador is dealing with a problem that Ecuador is not dealing with in terms of the level of gang activity and crime and all that kind of stuff. But it is interesting because, you want that stuff rooted out, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't want it having a long-term foothold where it becomes more and more entrenched and more difficult to eradicate. I agree. Of course, you're not going to stop the international drug trade, obviously. But if you can keep the cartels' impact and influence, I should say, to a minimum in politics and in other walks of life, then that's kind of best case scenario. And so that's sort of a bit unprecedented for Ecuador to be dealing with that problem over the last couple of years. Is different, is new. So we are seeing, a level of that stuff that we're not used to here. And the president's promised to do something about that. We're kind of talking about some of those things now. The population is very much behind that, that idea. That's really what he ran on, and what people care about is seeing the cartel activity stop, some of the gang/cartel activity stop. So we'll see. Like, he'll be successful to whatever degree he is, and to whatever degree that's genuine. That effort is genuine.
Yeah, that's the piece. Like, we've talked about this in other areas of culture, but as you see Ecuador develop, and people will talk about gentrification and immigrants and all this stuff, and they talk negatively about it. But in my opinion, being here for almost 3 years now, the biggest impact that I've seen on Ecuadorian culture and the change in it, obviously I haven't been here for that time, but seeing what it was and hearing stories and being here for the last 3 years is really media. It's social media. It's cell phones. It's now that everybody has, even lower class, the lowest class Ecuadorians have cell phones. They have smartphones. They're connected to the internet, and they're seeing the U.S. and they're seeing music and they're seeing industries that kind of glorify, like, and I don't know if we talked about this on a pod or if we just talked about this, off pods, where, back in the 80s and 70s and early 90s, hip hop and rap and that type of music industry wasn't the same as it is today. It was different values. It was different. The lyrics were different. They were about community. They were about, helping. It wasn't so ruthless. And then we saw, the glorification of like NWA And in the was that the 90s? That was the late 80s, early 90s.
I mean, Eazy-E was
Eazy-E.
mostly 80s, but then NWA was
and then
right around.
Right. So then you
89
see
or
that get popular, that style of rap, and then it becomes progressively more ruthless, and then the ruthlessness is glorified, and then because even back during our era, it wasn't like the same. There were rules. It wasn't like the same beefs. It wasn't like we're going to gang war. It wasn't about that. It was about community, and it was about, you had a beef, you settle the beef, and it's done. It doesn't lay on. It doesn't continue, and there's no, people aren't shooting each other, and then this era of, gangster rap and NWA, they've kind of glorified ruthlessness, and that changed the streets too. Like then that got popular, and then the actual gangs changed, and the decisions gang members did, they thought, well, this is the cool way to be a gang member now. I have to be more ruthless. That's how I gain respect. And then you see how that changes gangs in real life. And that's interesting. The point is, you saw how that changed American culture because we lived it. And now you're seeing that impact Ecuadorian culture, and probably cultures across the world, not just Ecuadorian culture, but just because they have access and they see, oh, this is what's cool now. This is what's popular now. This is real, and it's not. It's like manufactured ruthlessness, and it's people not. I don't even know how to describe it, but I just see that that's the biggest impact on the culture that I've seen, is that it's idolizing and glorifying like these Western, I don't even know if they're Western, whatever you want to, now you trip me up on the Western thing now.
Northwest.
There's a lot of Latino gangster stuff as well.
Oh, sure. Well, of course,
that's where they don't watch, American gangster rap. They watch like Latino.
Right, but that didn't come from, came from that.
From the US.
That didn't come from Latino rap organically. That came from Latino gangsters watching, getting access and seeing the cultural crossover. Yeah. So that's the part that's interesting. And then you're seeing that in music now. You're seeing that in music in Ecuador. You're seeing popular music. I was sitting in a taxi from Catamayo, and they have the music videos on the screen in the taxi, and I'm watching, and I'm like, wow, this is current Ecuadorian rap or hip hop. I'm like, wow, this is like gangster rap from the 90s.
Oh, yeah.
The way they do music videos and what they're glorifying, and
definitely.
I'm like, wow.
Maybe even a little bit more risque because they're allowed to show more than.
No, they absolutely was, from like a sexuality, sexualizing women and that kind of stuff for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a sad part about what you're referring to, and I think, just like you said, social media, access to just different medias. Plus, they watch Hollywood movies here a lot. Like they don't have they probably have their own type of South American or Latino made movies, but they watch a lot of Latino of Western movies and Hollywood movies. That's why I've spoken to, since I've been here, I've talked to a lot of Ecuadorians, and they're like, "What are you doing here? Like, we want to go where you're from. Like, what are you doing down here?
Don't you know the roads are paved with gold where you're from?"
Right.
Yeah. So they watch Hollywood movies with fancy everything, right? Beverly Hills, and they assume like that's what the U.S. looks like. Right. It's all perfect. They don't see the homelessness and all of the problems that the U.S. has.
Right. And they don't, and until they're in it, they don't fully understand how debt-driven the culture and society is. And so they see all the stuff and they see the lifestyle. It's kind of rented. It's not, you don't really own it. You're renting it on credit. And in some cases, in a lot of cases, like people are living check to check with maxed out credit cards, and it's normalized. It's not, it's kind of how we've talked, about, when we had some of those fires in the back, and the difference between how the gringos that are here, the expats that are here, how they reacted versus how Ecuadorians reacted on their level of panic or concern. It's almost kind of like that, where they've been in it so long that you're not even concerned about your debt level as a normal person in the States. Like, it's not even because it's just part of that. Everybody does it. Everybody's doing it. Everybody has it. It's not, there's nothing wrong with it because that's the way everybody does it. That's, so when you have, cultural crossover, you have Ecuadorians or people from Venezuela or anybody coming from South America going with that vision, that American dream, the American the lifestyle, the everybody's rich and look at all the stuff they have. They're going to learn really fast that in order to really have that, without skill set in there, the jobs that they're going to have to be able to, have to take on to get, in the areas they're going to have to live to make a decent income, they're going to have to take on debt like they probably never even considered or thought about. And that might be scary to them, or they might see everybody else is doing it. Why not? I don't know how that impacts like the psychology of somebody that's going to see that for the first time where everybody does it. But I mean, you could almost make the argument that, however you want to define the American dream, it's actually more attainable in places like Ecuador for people in a way. Like it's
at this point, yeah.
Right. It's hard to.
Well, I mean, the American dream was attainable in America before they regulated it out of possibility. You know, it was like it really was. You had this free economy and this free culture that had rule of law and had, a high standard of living because of the demand for the dollar, and so. Right,
and before the 70s, pre-70s, right? Yeah. Before Nixon, was it? Right. Or was Nixon, it Nixon? Yeah, Nixon took us off the gold standard, right? The Bretton Woods Agreement, and right. So you see stuff after that, and it's kind of been a slow drip, and then probably since 2000, it's been, almost like the faucet's on. In respect to that.
Yeah, but it's sort of just an idea at this point.
Yeah.
Like you set out to earn the American dream, and you immediately are told you need a bunch of licenses for that.
Right.
And some courses and training programs and certificates and a 6-month waiting period, and then we'll think about it.
Yeah. And they're changing things. Like I just was reading a bill that Biden is potentially passing. So it's mirroring a bill that I forget what the governor of California's Newsom passed, but it basically impacts contractors, independent contractors, and it essentially, which is, I think they did the last study I read, it was a Gallup study, and they studied, or they polled independent contractors, because the argument against for implementing a bill like I'm going to explain is that while these people really want to be full-time, they don't want to be independent contractors working part-time, even though some independent contractors work full-time, but they really want a full-time job. So they polled this, and it was around 10% of independent contractors across all trades in the States really wanted a full-time job, and 90% of them wanted to create their own schedules. They wanted the flexibility. They wanted to work the hours they wanted. They wanted to be on their own. They wanted to have their own business and be an independent contractor. They didn't want a full-time job, technically. So Gavin Newsom passed this bill where basically it forced all those people out of the state. And now the Biden administration has proposed mirroring that same legislation across the entire country, which would theoretically reduce jobs. Like if those people can't run their business as independent contractors how they are, that's like 3 or 4 million jobs. That's half the jobs of the that were lost in the Great Depression, right? So they could legislate those people out of work that have been doing something for 30 years, 40 years. Like it's wild that that's the state right now, that they're considering doing that. And they're going to make the argument it's for the greater good. It's to give people full-time jobs. But guess what? Those full-time jobs don't exist. That's most of them are independent contractors because they want to be, not because they have to be. So it's just, you're seeing, to your point, the American dream getting who wouldn't want?
You don't legislate your way to prosperity.
Right.
You don't regulate your way to prosperity.
But just to your point about the American dream, like your dream to run your own business isn't to work 9 to 5 every day of the week for the rest of your life until you're 70, time to retire. That's not what most people, So
no, and I mean that's why people are opting out. Like the last couple of generations, they're just creating content.
Right, it's wild.
They're not doing any of that stuff, for better or worse.
Right.
Like there's pluses and minuses, but people are seeing kind of the facade. Mm-hmm. They're seeing the facade of higher education, seeing the facade of career tracks and paths and how you know
Right.
that kind of stuff, and getting into all the systems and into Social Security and all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. Like it's
Yeah, we'll see now with student loan payments starting back up again in the States. Like they paused those for several years, and now those are all starting back up again, man. Like that's something that people haven't had. That's a huge, huge problem. That's a huge problem. That's a big reason why tuition in the States is so expensive, is because these universities have kept raising, because they just know it's not supply and, when you take supply and demand out of it, and now you can't afford it. Well, there's less demand. Well, now if you can afford it, even though you can't, same concept. It's a debt-driven society. Well, then prices keep going up. Prices keep going up. The cost keeps going up. And now you have a whole generation of people that are going to have a $500 nut, that they didn't have for the last 3 years, or more. And the interest rates are, some of these people are paying 7-8% on these notes. So they've been paying the interest for the last 15 years they've been out of college, and they still have the whole principal left to pay. Yeah. It's a racket.
yeah.
And on top of that, the elephant in the room for me is with the advent of AI, artificial intelligence, we'll have tons of jobs and careers that they'll be useless, they'll be obsolete. There'll be a lot of people that their job can be done in 10 seconds by an AI, something that would take them weeks to do, stuff like that. Like it's quite unbelievable what the AI stuff's able to do.
Yeah.
And I've spoken to like graphic designers and people that have said like, I don't know why anyone would hire me now if AI can do a better job than me in a fraction
faster
of the time,
Right. Free revisions, right? Yeah. It's interesting. Like I just saw a clip from the Terminator, and it was I forget, what was the main woman character's name? And I don't know, what I'm talking about. The main woman character from the Terminator movies. She was talking to somebody in the car, and they were talking to her about cyborgs and technology or something, and she's like, "Well, that doesn't exist now." And his response was, "It will in 40 years." And that's, from the movie is 2024. I'm like, "Oh, wow, interesting, Here we are. There it is again."
I was
Kind of
told
scary, actually.
I was told that the Terminator movies were actually part of a sequel that includes the Matrix movies. And
I think I told you this, yeah.
Was it you that was telling me?
What is the story?
This lady, I forget her name, but there was a lawsuit actually. She sued the
Wachowski sisters?
Wachowski brothers, sisters,
Whatever they are.
People.
because apparently she had presented her script at Hollywood, and they had rejected the idea and stuff. And then a few years later, they come out with the Matrix movie, and that was exactly her script for her.
Oh,
her
no
movie
kidding.
idea. And it was also like Terminator and the Matrix were basically part of the same.
It's like a 5-part. It was like a 5-part story that all
interesting.
goes together.
Huh.
Sure. And
Wow.
my understanding.
So
is
that go ahead, sorry.
I've heard an interview of her, and she was saying that actually what she claimed is that these were visions that she'd had, like prophetic visions of the future. And
Wow.
that first the world would be like a Terminator thing where robots would fight wars and stuff and eventually take over the system. And then down the line in the more dystopian future, we'd be like pods, being like in the Matrix, right?
Right. And it's really not far off. I'd imagine that the technology exists because we know the cybernetics exist.
Yeah.
And we know that, they're growing organs. In a lab, they're growing
and they're
human
admitting
tissues.
that they're cloning all kinds of animals.
Right, right. So that if you can, not only just the cloning, but the merging of the technology of the cybernetics with human tissue on the outside, like, dude, that's crazy to think about.
Very crazy.
But it's here, they're doing that kind of stuff, and that's kind of where you see Elon. That's where he's kind of, a lot of, I agree with, I love a lot of the stuff Elon does, man, with free speech on Twitter and allowing people to say things. I mean, it's a slippery slope all the time. But he's campaigning for human cyborgs, man. Like he wants Neuralink in everybody. And, he's talked about explaining how it can give vision to blind people and it can let them see different spectrums and people with disabilities. So there's a lot of good things that it can do, but then that's a slippery slope on what happens next and how that gets adopted by people. And at the end of the day, man, it's almost like we can make all these decisions in our lives to to live in a certain place and to make decisions about what we put in our bodies and how we, what we eat and what we consume in social media and what we consume with our time and our nutrition and our air and all that stuff. But you can't ever run from some of this stuff. Like running to Ecuador to thinking you're going to escape that at some point, like, I don't know how that, I don't know if that's an answer. That's not a solution for people. So if you're running from something, you got to figure it out. You got to do some work on yourself or understanding, or before you just go hop it. Because if you're running to Ecuador because you're running away from that, it's probably not the best decision, right?
I've seen that over and over.
Do you know what I'm trying to say? Yeah.
Work.
Okay. Yeah. So it's like, if you're running to something, if you're seeking things, if you're looking for community, that's probably the biggest thing for me now being here, is there is actually a real community that cares. That doesn't mean everybody's your best friend. That doesn't mean everybody loves everybody and everybody even likes everybody. But there's actual real community that's organic here that cares. And of course, yes, I'm not saying that there's no community in the United States, but it's a lot more superficial from my experience, and it's a lot less organic, and it's a lot less condensed. There's not these areas where there's these people that have these underlying threads that are uniting them, that's true community. And so if you're seeking something like that, if you're seeking community, if you're seeking nature, if you're seeking healthier living and more active lifestyles, those are reasons to come to Ecuador, to come to Vilcabamba, to check it out, to see if it's right for you. But if you're running from Elon cyborgs, if you're running from that kind of stuff, like, gosh, still come, check it out. Maybe it's still right for you, but it's just, I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, to me, it's a bit of both, because we can all say that we're also living here because we don't want certain things that are there. So you could say running away, or however you want to describe it, but we like that there's no 5G here. We like that there's no chemtrails, barely. We're running away. We want a place that there are no of these things, right? And that's here. So in a way, there's both. We love what's here, but we also, certain things that are there we don't want.
Right. I just mean,
yes.
I just meant from like, we get a lot of comments about, well, what do you think's going to happen to Ecuador in 20 years? And what do you, what about this? And what about this? And what about this in 10 years from now? Like, again, if the trends stick, it doesn't, my point is that it doesn't matter where you are in the world, right? All that matters is right now, this is what it is. Yeah. So if that's appealing to you, then come check it out.
Sure.
Right? Because who knows what 10 years from now, did we ever think, we've heard about AI. Again, the Cyborg, the Terminator movie, that was 40 years ago, right? They've been talking about that. We've been talking about this stuff. Well, it's real now, and we're looking at it like, holy crap, just the stuff that we have access to with ChatGPT and some of these AI programs, it's almost mind-blowing, right? But it's actually here. So what are the next steps? Who knows, right? To try and project that, and the timing of when that's going to happen and where, and
what to do about it.
And what to do about it, exactly. So, and that's kind of what I meant, running from versus running to. So like right now, this is what this region of Ecuador is. It has the things that we don't want right now. For how long? Who knows? But
who knows?
like, we don't know how long any of us have. Again, it's something like, we lost Holly while we were in the States. So that's like my kid's first big real loss. The dog has been, we adopted her when Belle was 4, and Quinn's been part of her whole life. So that's, it makes you really think, you don't always get that next time with people, with family, with friends. So again, Ecuador is this now. Does that mean that it's going to be like that forever? Who knows? But if that's appealing to you, take the step, man. Check it out. Come see if it's right for you, because you might not get that next time, right? So that's kind of just how I've been looking at it, especially, and it's a lesson for the kids, and not still living with discernment and prudence and some level of planning, but truly living in the moment and being grateful for the way things are now and what you have and appreciating that and I think that this area is conducive for people that have those types of values to be able to live them in a real way.
Wise words, my friend. Yeah, there's kind of maybe, I think I already forgot one of them. There was two.
I just talked a
There
lot.
was
Sorry.
2 points.
Yeah.
No, I think that was my favorite part of the pod.
Come on, your shirt was pretty epic, man.
You sure?
Oh, this. the
No, this is
Eagle
a nice shirt too. Oh, you got your linen on today, bro.
My wife got me
Nice.
this for Christmas.
Nice.
It's exciting, but yeah. I mean, I think like one of the things that people are dealing with, right, is I think we all grew up with Hollywood and with this sort of perception that other parts of the world, they're kind of, they're crime-ridden, they're dirty, things don't work, the infrastructure's bad.
Yeah.
This is sort of like this imaging that we have in the Western or in the northwestern world. This is sort of the the stereotypes we have, and so I think that's a big piece of it, right? Is like, kind of over like understanding the reality of what's actually happening where you live and in other places, because there's a big world out there.
Yeah.
Not just Ecuador, right? There's a lot of places on Earth to live that have some interesting attributes and some interesting parameters and sets of circumstances. So, there's that, but it's also really defining your values.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, are you trying to get back to sort of a more natural living? Is that something you're interested in? Are you, if you're trying to do that, I'd say this is a very conducive place for that. But like, what's your value system? Like, is Amazon.com more or less important to you than some of the stuff we have here, right? Like some of the lifestyle things and whatnot that we have here. Like, what really, for real, like, what are your values?
And
like,
it's, go ahead. Well, it's even with the Amazon, I just want to make the point that it's almost like the immediacy of that value. Because you can get Amazon.com, it just takes 2 weeks instead of 2 hours and 2 days.
And costs more.
Sure, but it's not like it doesn't exist.
Right.
It doesn't. So, yeah. Anyway, I just want it's not even like a
No, but
real
some of
road.
those
It's not
sort of
even like a
like-
massive
No,
barrier to entry.
I agree, but it
Right.
could be in your head.
Agreed.
Right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's like you might come and freak out because you can't hit some buttons and 5 minutes later there's food at your door.
Right.
Your favorite Chinese fried rice. Like, you can still do that here,
Yeah.
but you got to call a taxi and you got,
Yeah.
it's a little bit more of a process. It's not it's not one click, right? So under, defining those values, I think matters a lot in terms of helping you to make those decisions, because there are inconveniences here. The reward is that, I finished work last night, around, I'm closing up the office yesterday around, 6:30, and I decide to walk to the sendero, like the path, which is surrounded by beautiful bamboo trees and nature, and along the river. And I took a 20-minute walk along the river, and then sat out on some rocks and contemplated life for a few minutes, and then and then continued my walk home, sort of the long way, just to go for a walk.
Yeah.
Things like that, right, to me are really valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I care that I don't ever wake up and it's cold. I care that, I get a lot of sun here, that nature's everywhere, that clean food is really available, that the community stuff, that I live with kind of like-minded people who are awesome. Like those are my values, right? And I can live with the inconveniences and the weirdness of a different culture and a different, sort of perspective on life. And another point I wanted to make real quick was kind of going back to some of that cultural stuff that you were talking about, Brandon. It's interesting, right? Like, you could make the argument, one could make the argument that the sort of Western culture is insidious. It's sort of like, it's basically TV and the values that we show on TV and through media and music and stuff like that. And it's pretty destructive in a lot of ways, right? Destructive.
And it's not even organically popular anymore. It's like it's manufactured popularism, like manufactured pop culture. It's
Yeah.
not like things got popular, like ideas gain popularity organically too. That actually happens in real life, but it seems like in the Northwestern culture, it's like a manufactured pop culture now.
Yeah.
Like they're telling you, it's like they're forcing things to be popular because they're putting it everywhere. That's why Taylor Swift's got she's in football now, and she's a whole new market, and she puts out a new tour that sells out in 2 minutes for $8 billion, and everybody in the world, when I went back, everybody's talking about Taylor Swift.
Really?
Like literally, like that's not organic. That's because they force it everywhere. They push it everywhere, right? Now everybody's in Taylor Swift, and if you want to go down a rabbit hole, guys, go down the rabbit hole, Anton LaVey rabbit hole. But we'll leave that for another episode. But anyway, keep going.
Satanist Anton.
Perhaps.
Anton LaVey. But yeah, so I mean, you look at those kinds of things, right, and it does change the culture, right? It makes you kind of get a more violent, more superficial, less connected, less moral, blah blah blah, right?
You take the humanity out of it.
You take the humanity out of it, right? And so, and of course, in a place like the U.S., people have very few. There's probably some parts of the country where this is somewhat intact. I would say probably in the South and certain rural areas, but in general, people have not a deep connection to the land in terms of like this is where I'm from, this is my land and this is my part of the, so you take that and you some of that, that has and continues to export all over the world to every culture on earth, including Ecuador. But it's really a testament to homogeneous, intact cultures, the difference, right? So what you have in Ecuador is you have a homogeneous, intact culture, right? You have a culture that the same families have been here since Spain came, right? And did whatever went on with the between the indigenous and the Spaniards that created the mix we have in Ecuador. And since then you've had people basically living on the same land generation after generation after generation, and that lasted until pretty recently. Like you could argue in many places that's still the case in the country, but it wasn't that long ago that being mobile was really difficult here. Like moving was not easy. There's not airports all over. There wasn't that infrastructure. For many families it was an agrarian lifestyle for so many generations. Like you're not gonna pick up from that and go and become a doctor in Spain or something, right? So you have this culture where everyone's known each other forever, and those ties go back forever, and observationally what that has created here, and I do think this is causation, and not correlation, but is a degree of humanity, of camaraderie, of caring about one another, of sort of just doing things in a way that makes sense. It's like no one here is gonna throw the rule book at you.
Right.
You're gonna talk and you're gonna work it out and you're gonna do it in a way that makes sense. And if it gets screwed up, no one's gonna scream and yell and get upset. And it's very and so yeah, I mean it's interesting, right? The sort of, it's almost the antithesis of what the cultural stuff wants us to believe what we should be doing.
Right.
Get the degree, become a doctor, move overseas, do this, do that.
Buy Gucci,
buy
buy
everything,
right?
Yeah. And it's like, okay, well that leads to sort of this cultural stuff we're seeing, with in the Western world. Right. And then we get an alternative example in rural Ecuador of like, well, what does it look like when that's really not much of an influence? And we have a very intact society that culturally has their ties going back a really long way. Looks very different. I like it. I really like it. Yeah. Like the people are beautiful. They're like kind, genuine, real people who are lovely to interact with and live around and be friends with and like.
And there's 2 points that I thought of while you were sharing that. Like one is, again, how the Northwestern culture is influencing Ecuador from social media, in the sense that You know, you're seeing in cities, again, not the rural areas nearly as much at all, if at all, but you're seeing in cities where you're seeing, you know, they're wanting commodity. You know, it's a slippery slope because there's a slippery slope between art and commodities in some industries, like clothing. Like clothing is really a commodity. So high end, and yes, there's difference in qualities and stuff, but style, I mean, it's really a commodity. So a high end, a Gucci shirt versus a shirt that you bought from Walmart that's a generic brand, it's still a shirt, it's still a commodity. Somebody's willing to pay more because they were marketed, because they were told this is status, this, they were sold something. That's cultural values. It's still just a shirt. Like there's no difference. You can make the same shirt with the same materials, with the same quality, put a Gucci brand on it, and put a you know, Walmart brand, and somebody would pay 3 times as much for this shirt. It makes no sense, right? But that's like cultural influence of, because, and it goes back to the stuff we were talking about with social media and rap, and this is what you do with money, and this is why, and blah. So you're seeing some of that. I see some of that, like when we went through Cuenca, where I'm in Quito. I'm seeing some of that more in younger people, yeah, in those cities. But that's where it's coming from, that, right? On the flip side, the other thing that I noticed is, in addition to all those things that you talked about, it's almost like there's more of a connection to like spirituality and God in South America and Ecuador, and less so in the States. It feels like we're getting further and further from God in the States, and we still have some of that here where it's real. And I was just looking at some Google Trends that shows interest over time, and I first looked at, because when I was looking at stuff in a previous episode with like Donald Trump and Elon Musk and some of these other characters, I'm like, what about like spirituality and God and Jesus and that kind of stuff? And I looked at, over the last year, you can look at worldwide, and I looked at Donald Trump and Jesus Christ, just to see like interest over time. There were times that worldwide, over the last year, Donald Trump is way more popular than Jesus Christ. And then if you look by region, you'll see that in South America, almost never Donald Trump has more interest than Jesus Christ. And in the States, in the United States and Canada, my gosh, Donald Trump has 50% more interest, and Jesus Christ is at 15%. So again, I don't even know exactly what that means.
It's an anecdote.
It's a proxy maybe for, you know, the closeness or the level of spirituality, the closeness to God, or the closeness people have in their life to that, where relative to here in South America, and particularly in Ecuador, where people do still have that spiritual value, where it means something, and it's more in the culture, and it's more talked about on the, you know, in public, and it's not, you know, I don't know. It was just interesting that.
No, it's definitely, it's completely, the culture is rooted in the Roman Catholic Church here. Like there's the church calendar, and they have the feasts and the fasts, and the Lent, and Carnival is even it's right before Lent, right? The Carnival celebration on Christmas. They have the special celebrations. There's a Tres Magos recently. We had like the mayor, like the whole town goes. I mean, it's part of the culture. It's every year they go through these cycles, right? They always have something almost every month, and sometimes they're like wild parties downtown that you wouldn't think are religious at all.
Right.
But they are actually. The root of it is, including when they do well, that's not a wild party by any means, but they carry the statue of the Virgin Mary between.
That's probably the biggest event in this region.
Yes,
yeah,
that's big. That's like hundreds of thousands of people. Go out.
It's awesome. Yeah.
It's pretty amazing.
So like most of the Ecuadorians you meet, like they have some faith in their form of Christianity, in the Roman Catholic Church, but they're very fervent, and actually in some ways I think statistically that could be demonstrated as well. Poverty and having less typically leads people to be closer to a spiritual or religious belief, because they're praying to God, they're asking God for help for these types of things, whereas when you have plenty, typically you don't really need God as much, right?
Right.
Your money can take you. where
Right.
you want to go.
And it's like the ends of the extremes. Like most people fall in between. Like most people aren't all the way down here on the poverty level, and most people don't have so much money that they don't know what to do with, right? So it's those groups that have time, right? They have time to be able to think and do that. And like most people in the middle, like a lot of the middle classes everywhere, they're running and gunning. They're doing their job. They don't even have time to consider spirituality, to have that connection, because they're in the system they're in, and they're working, and their wives work, and their kids got these activities in school, and all these expectations from society and culture that this is what success looks like, that it almost breeds God out of the equation, because unless you purposefully, convictedly make it part of your life, it's really easy for it to become, again, boiling frog, to be a little less and a little less and a little less and a little less, and next generation, and next thing you know, you've got Donald Trump at 60% of interest and Jesus Christ at 10. Wild, in just like a generation or two.
I just want to clarify for people too, like the culturally, Ecuador for sure is Catholic, right? Like pretty much all of Latin America and a good chunk of Europe and so on and so forth. Similar to Italy, for example, right? So Ecuador is definitely culturally Catholic, no question. But one of the things I appreciate about here is, like all aspects of the culture, they're not zealots about anything, religion included, right? So they're not beating you over the head with religion. And they tend to have a very, almost like a more spiritual view of religion. Like they tend to they certainly believe in God, and they certainly, but their beliefs are varied. That, number one, they're not all Catholics, and even the ones that identify as Catholic don't necessarily hold all the Catholic beliefs.
Sure.
And then you also have, I would say, on a percentage basis, like people that attend Mass on Sunday regularly is pretty small in this country. You'll have a church in every town. And on Sundays, if you pass by during service, there'll be some people in there. Yeah. In some towns, maybe a lot of people. But like a percentage-wise of the town, tiny. Tiny fraction. Yeah. So it's not, it's not a culture where people wear their religion on their sleeve and run around telling everyone about it and doing any of that stuff at all. It's a very kind, accepting, open in that way. Mm-hmm. And they maintain that connection, which I really like, and that sort of,
And go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that is an aspect of the Roman Catholic Church and other churches that are a little more like that, at least from my understanding. Like the Protestant evangelicals are the ones who will come and knock on your door, or have signs on the street trying speaking to people. Roman Catholics, they just do their things, but they don't try to evangelize and recruit, and they don't go out and do that kind of stuff. So that there's partially that, and then what you said about where the percentage of people that go. Anyways, I'm not sure what percentage it would be, but I know that there's multiple masses during the week. It's not just on Sunday. I think the Sunday morning one is the smallest one, actually. I think there's one on Sunday night where actually most people go to. If you go to town on Sunday night, it's packed. Actually, I think their masses at night tend to be the ones that have a lot more people. And on our road to go from town to Cucanama, where we live, we pass two chapels. And there's very small little Roman Catholic chapels, and every time they have a service, it is packed. There's they don't have enough space in the church. There are actually people outside the doors. They can't.
I think you just mean percentages of population.
Yeah, just percentage.
I mean, So the big church in town. I mean, what if they're packed? Maybe what is there? 200 people? Maybe 200 people out of a town of 8,000. So it's a really small percentage. I think those percentages. Just talking to some folks in the States, those percentages are coming down in the States dramatically, particularly for, after COVID, in general with the culture, but then after COVID, a lot of churches, places of worship of all religions kind of stopped, and then people stopped going back, and, it seems like there's some really convicted, fervent, religious groups that are still doing that, and some that aren't. I mean, just to make it did you guys see the tunnel in New York? I think there was a tunnel under this Jewish synagogue that they just found, and they've arrested a bunch of.
Oh, really?
They just arrested 10 or 15 Jews from this synagogue because there was this underground tunnel that there's all these different stories about when it was built, and I guess the guys got arrested because the city was bringing cement trucks to cement it off. But yeah,
Wow.
I just read about that, or saw the videos actually of them walking them out.
Really?
And oh yeah,
Wow.
yeah, So again, so if you're that fervent, like, and one of the theories was that they built this tunnel during COVID so that they could still go to synagogue and so worship. There's all kinds of conspiracy theories that go along with it, but that's one of the reasons. But it's just like you almost had to go to that extent if you really wanted to in some of these churches during the lockdown. So, it's just, you're just seeing much less of that everywhere in the West, as you're seeing God removed from culture. And
Right.
it's, I don't know if it's again, is it causation? Is it because we're glorifying this culture that God's being removed, or is it I don't know. Is it
Or
chicken?
are people just finding God on their own without the go-between?
I mean, it could be, but do you see a lot more people finding God in the West?
I see a lot more of what you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, maybe here in Ecuador, where it is much more open to different viewpoints and different beliefs, and there are indigenous beliefs that aren't Christian that exist here that have been practiced for thousands of years, and so and you see people fervently doing that or open to that. So,
Sure.
but there's just much more. Again, regardless of what you believe, I don't think it's a stretch to say, in Ecuador, anywhere I've been in Ecuador, that more people believe in God and are willing to talk about it, to talk about God, whatever God they believe in, but they believe in God, than there is in the States right
I
now.
don't know if I've met an Ecuadorian atheist.
Really?
Yeah, no, you're right.
Like, you don't find
They
that.
probably, if they were, they probably wouldn't say it or something.
Right,
It might be
right.
frowned upon in some sense.
I mean, that would be a very unusual
Right.
opinion for
Right.
sure.
Right.
No, and they do say, "Que Dios te bendiga,"
Yeah.
"Si Dios quiere."
Yeah.
Right.
They're constantly.
So is
it's
that
part
the
of
connection? Is that the connection? Is that God bringing humanity back, bringing the culture together? Is that why this exists here, because of that, or vice? I don't know. Like it's interesting.
I think on a side note, it is interesting for the viewer, and maybe for your point of view, Jesse, as well, that I don't see. Wait. I don't see the Roman Catholic Church, because it is majority. Maybe it's 90% Ecuadorians are Catholics. Then they might be another 5 to 10%,
Sure.
evangelical Protestant, and then there's like the occasional Muslim and Jew, but there's very few of like the other ones, like Buddhists and other things, right? Of the major world religions. But I was going to say, the Roman Catholic Church, which stems from the Vatican and the Pope, you don't see that connection in Ecuador very much. I doubt that the
interesting.
Vatican is sending a whole bunch of money to Ecuador for them to build their churches. Like, the churches here are very, very simply built, at least. Maybe not the big ones in Cuenca or Guayaquil, which are almost touristy areas. But like, if you speak also to some Roman Catholics here, they'll say like, "Oh yeah, the Vatican, they have all the money," and like they don't really they kind of reject the papacy to some extent as well. Because I guess I'm just saying this because some people might think Roman Catholic Church, corruption, the Pope, and all that stuff. The Ecuadorian Roman Catholic is not really connected to the Vatican. I mean, I'm sure there's a hierarchical connection to some extent, but people here, it's not like they talk about the Pope, or you don't see pictures of the Pope everywhere and stuff. And
Right.
I don't know if the Pope's ever been to Ecuador. Maybe he has.
I don't know.
I'm not sure, but yeah, I just think it's interesting. Like, the church in town, the Roman Catholic Church, they've repainted it, I don't know, at least 3-4 times since in a few.
Oh, really?
It looks nice now.
They repainted
Yeah, the
occasionally,
recent
they
one I
changed the color
noticed.
even.
Did
I
you
hadn't
notice,
noticed
like,
before
even
that.
the
looks
inside,
nice.
it looks really nice,
But
yeah.
that was all self-funded by
By the
By
community?
the community, yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
awesome.
I was asked by some locals also, "Do you want to contribute? We're going to do a revamp of the church," and it looks really nice. But it was
Yeah.
all locally,
Nice.
local people
I
that
just want
donated
them to fix the
make it
clock.
nice.
The clock would be
clock
nice if
still
it
doesn't work.
still doesn't work. No.
Since I've been in Vilcabamba.
Yeah.
All right, that's it.
Yeah.
We're cutting. We're out of here.
Clock-
Too
the
long.
clock struck
No
midnight.
more subjects.
Jesse's about to turn into a
I
pumpkin.
thought we were done.
Oh, all right. Do some taglines or something.
Well, hey guys, if you like the video, subscribe to the channel, like the channel, hit the bell icon. Check out the retreat promo video. Actually, we didn't do a retreat promo video. So check out the link to the We Travel page in the link below if you're interested in our Vilcabamba lifestyle retreat in April. We can link prior
Yeah, we'll
retreat
link the
videos
promo
for now.
video and the
Promo video, check that out. What else did we need? Well, check the links for some other things we told you we'd link down below. I don't remember them all at this point. And comment if you want to see Carl wear his shirt next week on the pod. And Jesse probably won't, even if you tell him to, so it doesn't matter because he don't care.
How about this? How about if the Eagles are a mess right
They
now?
are a mess. Wow.
They've lost, I think, 5 or 6 or something
Against
like that.
some, the bottom feeders.
Yeah, they're a disaster. But if we win against Tampa, I think the shirt should get worn.
All right, deal.
I think the shirt should get worn.
And if you want to see Carl wear it, comment, what do we want to comment? Pecs? Pecs or muscles or something like that.
Steroids.
Flex.
No
Comment
steroids.
something related to Carl's
He's on that.
gigantic,
I'm just kidding. He's on
gigantic muscles in the comments below. So, yeah.
All right. We hope to see you here one day, guys.
So until then,
We'll see you next time.
ciao, guys.
Ciao. If you're interested in real estate properties, all of our property videos will now be uploaded on a different channel. Please click the link in the description down below.